A very, very pleasant good morning to members of the Small Business Association of Barbados, to our friends, to our colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us for this first in our webinar series for 2026. Now, we're still in the month of January, so I believe I can always say at this time, Happy New Year. Those of you who have not had the opportunity to speak to so far, I hope that this year brings you all of the best wishes and prosperity, good health, and success in your endeavors. I'm Dr. Lynette Holder, Chief Executive Officer of the Small Business Association, and it is my pleasure to moderate this session over the next few moments. Now, if you're new to our platform, the SBA has been organizing a webinar series for some time now, and we try to focus on a topic of interest and a topic believed that is critical to small business development and overall business endeavor. And we bring subject matter experts to discuss the various themes, the various topics, and hopefully provide information that will help in your business endeavor. This is the first month of this new year, and you'll appreciate we are in that uh, uh, process, if you will, of planning. We are looking at what this year can portend for us as a sector, as organizations. And we thought that for this first webinar, we would address this theme of prospects for business. What does 2026 hold for us? Now, the fact is, we can plan, yes, we can project, we can forecast as much as the science will allow. But we know that there are some aspects, some things that are outside of our control. We understand that. But it is important to plan because the saying is if you fail to plan, well, then, you may very well plan to fail. And we don't want that for our sector. So we want as much as possible to have a good grasp on the issues that may impact small businesses, the issues that may impact business in general, and hopefully glean some information from the experts that we can plan our future. And so today, for our first series session in this series, we have invited Professor Justin Robinson to help us distill this topic. And in a few moments, we'll invite Dr. Robinson to come and share his thoughts with us. Before we get to that, though, those of you who may be new to this process, please, we're asking you to jot your questions down, jot your thoughts down. And at the end of the presentation, we will have some questions, some comments, and we will refer to the chat feature on this Zoom platform for your intervention. So please jot your questions down, and at the end of the presentation, please, you can go ahead and post in the chat. We'll have a conversation with our expert here today on the queries, questions, and so on that you may have. And also at the end of the exercise, I'm going to ask you please to stay with us for just another 5 to 7 minutes to complete a very short evaluation tool. We've put together a few questions that we are asking you to share your thoughts, give us some input, give us some feedback so we can plan for the remainder of this year, and we can also have a good assessment from you on our session today. This is a critical part of this process, your feedback, your assessment of this webinar. And also, at the end of it, we will share with you, our members in particular, a key event that's coming up in this quarter that we don't want you to miss. So I want you to stay on for the end of the session when we'll have the opportunity to provide even more information to you. So 2026 has started off, colleagues, I'm sure you would agree with me, with some surprises. We are in an election year here in Barbados. We know all that's happening relative to the geopolitical issues across the globe. We still are confronted with cost of living issues. We have the governor of the central bank just this week in his forecast spoke to the growth in the economy, but some issues relative to cost of living. And we know that increase in cost is impacting the business community as well. So much is happening this month, this year, it would appear. And we want, therefore, to be prepared. We want to have a good sense of what we need to do as a business community to strengthen our operations and therefore steer our businesses along some path of sustainability and growth. And who better to help us understand this than our special guest this morning? Now, let me say to you that Professor Robinson is no stranger to the SBA and to the SBA's platforms. He's shared with us in so many other fora on a number of issues impacting business and in particular small businesses. He's here again today to do just that. So, Dr. Justin Robinson, we know he is a professor of corporate finance. He's a national of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and currently serves as the principal of the UWI Cave Hill 5 campus. I believe this is in Antigua and Barbuda. He obtained his PhD in finance from the University of Manchester, UK, and he also holds a Master's of Science in Finance and Econometrics from the Florida International University and a BSc in Management Studies from the University of the West Indies here at Cave Hill campus in Barbados. Professor Robinson's research interests are capital markets in developing countries, public finance, financial risk management, and corporate finance in developing countries. He currently serves as the director of the Central Bank of Barbados. He's also on the JMMB International, the BISCO board of directors, and also he's the first vice president of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. So a little bit about our special guest this morning. As I said, no stranger to us. And from that brief bio, you'll appreciate that he comes well qualified, competent enough to help us address our topic today. Outlook 2026, what are the prospects for business? Over to you, Dr. Robinson. Good morning and welcome again.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning. A pleasure to be back. Thank you, Lynette, for that warm welcome. So I'm going to try to navigate in maybe two parts today, starting with what I see as a sort of really much broader context for the Caribbean, including Barbados, and then coming down to something more specific for businesses, small business. And maybe we can have a little conversation about that, because I always think that people running businesses understand that much better than I can. So I sort of team the overview that then leads us into the small business specific part, what I call an existential moment, sort of reckoning for the Caribbean. And so that no one is coming to save us. I think this environment creates both risks and opportunities for the small business sector. So again, much of us, I think, are aware of a lot of these global geopolitical issues. I guess I am of the view that, I guess, very well articulated by Mark Carney, Canada's Prime Minister, former central bank governor of England and Canada. Now, what we are seeing is a rupture, a fundamental shift. So we've had what many believe would be America first, with a bluntness that leaves no ambiguity. And I'd say as a sovereign country, that's really their right to take that. But what I see as if a wake-up call, if we didn't notice and no one is coming to save us, is that Canada and Europe certainly accommodated the new US stance. They tried to recalibrate, or in a sense, they went along with the US policy shift until Greenland was threatened. It appears that suddenly sovereignty mattered, And in some ways, decades of comfortable assumptions about the way the world, the economy, businesses work seem to have been dissolved in me. I think the lesson for the Caribbean could not be clearer. The US has its policy shift. Canada, Europe are really not coming to save us. They didn't really, in a way, seriously question or challenge the US stance until it came home to them. China has not come in on anybody's behalf. So that's again my sense. No one is coming to save us, and this is an existential moment for us, which I think creates opportunities as well as threats. And I mean, the world we've lived in is a post 1945 world. And I would argue that it established frameworks, in which small nations could exist with degrees of dignity, not perfect. The UN Charter, the UN system. The UN system is based on a legal fiction that Antigua and the United States are peers. They're the same, one country, one vote in there. And it sort of gave diplomatic voice to countries that could never command attention through force. There was also a legal, global, international legal framework, ICJ and others, WTO. They offered dispute resolution that could otherwise be settled by power alone. And a lot of these global frameworks created arenas where our vulnerable states could demand recognition, we could bargain. In a sense, CARICOM itself is a sort of creature of this era. And we really build institutions, economies, and the assumptions that this rules-based international framework would remain the grammar of international affairs, so to speak. The stark reality is that while this system was always fundamentally flawed, the quiet parts are being said out loud, and all of our assumptions no longer hold. The rules-based international order that we were told to trust has revealed itself as a convenience for the powerful that is suspended the moment it becomes inconvenient. So in a lot of ways, I would argue this is very different from the Cold War era. We've moved from competition between great powers, then the US, Soviet Union, to coercion. In the Cold War era, superpowers competed for our allegiance. They courted us, etc. Non-alignment was possible. Was how can we win your partnership? And that competition between the great powers gave space for small states to have some agency. Today's environment, compliance is demanded, not quoted. Economic interdependence is weaponized against others. You see, non-alignment doesn't really seem to be possible. It's really what will you suffer if you don't comply or defy? And I think what that means for us and in the macroeconomic and ultimately businesses, that I guess what we like to call policy space is shrinking. The space for independent maneuver among nation states seems to be shrinking as compliance is demanded by the economies with which we are deeply integrated. And it's really not a matter of how can we win your partnership, how can we quote you, for instance, what will you suffer if you defy us? So every decision we make in a way now carries the shadow or potential for punishment. In some ways, I would suggest that the environment we are in is more dangerous than the Cold War. There's no countervailing power. China offers investment but doesn't compete for any allegiance. Rules are targets. And in a sense, geography does not offer us any escape. Some of our Caribbean islands are closer to Miami than Miami is to Atlanta. So many aspects of our lives are touched by American proximity. So in a way, I think we are faced in an environment where there's a hegemon that really is exercising its power from which our geography offers us no escape. Now, one of our strategies or thoughts is this is a passing storm, and that is possible. None of us can know the future. My own sense is, and I tend to agree with Kanye and others, that this is a shift. It reflects an intellectual groundwork that has been laid over decades. That America First nationalism commands substantial elite support in the United States. I think one of the metrics I pay attention to since his presidency, I don't think the president's approval rating has fallen below 50%, 40%, sorry. And it's shifted both political parties in the US to the right. So the coercive turn may persist, regardless of which party or person holds power. I think the degree may vary, but the direction is set, and you can get up a good debate about that among political scientists international. What I would argue suggests that in some ways our development model hasn't worked for us. For a long time, a critical plank was to export some of our most ambitious people and import their remittances. No? So migration has been a key element. We've relied heavily on trade arrangements, favorable arrangements that has now gone. Again, tourism, that's critical, will continue, but again, I think we don't need to tell anybody about the vulnerability. Remittances are vulnerable. And then the international system was assumed to constrain the powerful and help protect the weak. And each of these dependencies have been exposed. And in a lot of ways, there's enough view that we've built economies that most of our people enjoy, but not economies they would choose. And I would argue that the uncomfortable truth is that some of our failures are not by accident. I think we've developed exactly the economies that existing power structures require. Import dependence enriches merchants who control distribution. The fragmentation of the region protects politicians whose power depend on national constituencies. Scarce productive employment keeps labor costs down. And the brain drain, the migration channel, relieves governments of demands they cannot meet. So I'm suggesting that in some ways, the opportunity in the new environment is, can we embrace, if we accept no one is coming to save us, we are on our own, we have to make do on our own. What would a Caribbean build for opportunity and greater self-reliance, I should say? I don't think we can be what would it look like? Can we create opportunities for our best and brightest to really maximize their potential and earnings right in our space? And I have a couple of examples of, global competitiveness developed and operated locally. I think at the macro level, there could be 5 shifts as we begin to imagine a new economy for a new environment. Climate adaptation really as an employment export industry. Every challenge we face is a challenge the world would face. Can we be a lab and sales room? Digitization, digital infrastructure, I think is almost like a public utility. It's like electricity. High-speed internet is the foundation of every service industry that can pay global wages. Again, how can we have greater energy reliance? How can we further integrate our economies? And I think the OECS is leading the way. How can we extend OECS levels of integration to Caribbean? The OECS has a common currency, a single port, labor moves freely. When I was offered the position in Antigua, I went and renewed my citizen passport. I can come here and work, just show my passport and that's it. They coordinate policy. And how with that higher level of integration can we forge more of a common foreign policy to negotiate a shifting environment? So what I want to argue as I sort of wrap up development is not a technical problem awaiting the right policy paper. I see it's a political struggle over who captures the gains from economic activities, a matter of political will. And political will doesn't descend from above. I mean, you might get lucky and have a political leader who has that will, but that's luck. Luck is variable. So political will does not descend. It rises from populations that refuse to accept. Right? So our governments, private sector, citizens, I think I have some call to actions there again that we can talk about. I think the stakes are high. The post-war order really is what set us up. That framework is collapsing, and we are facing not a policy challenge, but an existential reckoning, whether we can survive as anything other than vassal states and remain in any substantive sense free. So I think time has passed. In some ways, this need not be a tragedy, it can be liberation. No one is coming to negotiate for us. No one is coming to protect our interests. No one is coming to build the economies our children deserve. In a way, this is not a tragedy. It's a liberation from the illusion that someone else would do this for us. We build economies our people enjoy. Now we must build economies they choose. The only question, I think, is whether we will act like we finally understand. And in a way, that sort of is my broader overview. And I now want to segue into what does this mean in a sort of Barbados context and SME? What's changing that really may affect your business? So I think there is U.S. trade policy uncertainty. And in many ways, I mean, the big implication, one of the big is that it can disrupt supply chains overnight. So there's that supply chain fragility. And in a coercive type of environment, it's not a simple matter that if the US supply chain is disrupted negatively for you, that you switch to another supply chain that is better, because you may face coercion if you don't, if you choose to make switch. And after a long period of globalization, and its varying degrees, where economies were really said, okay, Cold War has ended, we don't have this political risk. You just focus, you don't have to worry about the politics. Just focus on being the most competitive economy you can be and build global supply chains to enhance that competitiveness. in a lot of ways now, that integration is actually is now being weaponized. So again, currency and financial access. Not such a big issue in Barbados because we have a lot of foreign banks. Sort in the OECS, where you have a lot of local banks corresponding banking relationships under pressure. US dollar access may tighten. We see a lot of volatility. We see a sort of people trying to reduce their dependence on the dollar globally, massive surge in gold as central banks switch out, as a number of countries dump US dollar assets and are accessing gold in return. And we see the US dollar sinking to low levels. Now, tourism volatility is an interesting one in that we haven't seen this show up yet in the Caribbean. We sort of think, okay, with all this volatility, so I should really put a question mark there. Because tourism arrivals and spenders, as far as I'm aware, really continue to rise rapidly across the region. We see record arrivals in the last 2 years in different forms. I mentioned the supply chain. And the labor market shifts. The migration valve seems to be closing, which means that talent stays, but wage pressures may rise. And I think the migration valve, certainly, if you were to read the Project 2025 document prepared by the Heritage Foundation in the US, which it seems to be shaping many aspects of the Trump administration policies. One of the clearer policy positions is that they want to close 90 plus, maybe 99% of opportunities for legal migration to the US. I think the term they use, they want to reduce that to a trickle. In addition, they also want to get rid of illegal migrants and also even some people who have some legal status, how that can be reversed. And I say that migration valve, again, maybe hasn't, I don't think it's necessarily been as important for Barbados, except at certain levels, much more important to say Guyana, Jamaica, Trinidad. But at that valve closing, what are the implications? So, in a sense, I sort of think that there are three scenarios coming out of this. Possible scenarios, some mix, and some mix of the three. So disruption, supply and trade shocks. Disruption can come with, are there higher US tariffs on key inputs, shipping cost spikes from different policies, supplier country sanctions, greater currency volatility. So this is where I see the disruptive potential. So that's one scenario. Contraction, do we see demand decline coming from a tourism downturn, remittance reduction, regional recession, consumer belt tightening? And what are some of the opportunities? Are there new openings, import substitution gaps, regional market access, a different relationship with the diaspora, migrants returning and creating new opportunities, digital service exports? And it sort of helps me, I think, from where I sit. In some ways, I run a business. I have all of these assumptions, all these scenarios, and I'm updating and what's the probability and how they play out. What might be some sector-specific implications? I think there could be some higher risk in retail distribution, tourism services, if we have these disruption, if we have contraction and supply chain challenges. Medium risk in, say, professional services, food and agriculture, construction, maybe creative industries, tech and digital, maybe facing lower risk if you have from the disruptions and the contraction scenario. We're interested to hear from you as well. So what might be some actions? And I think some of this you might be familiar with and you're already doing in your business. In a sense, a number of small businesses sort of exist in where you have to be challenged. I mean, cash is important. Cash is king. Cash is oxygen. In volatile times, the business with cash, access to cash survives. So again, how can you? Listen, people probably do this already. If you are not, how can you seek to fortify your cash positions, cut your costs now? How can you de-risk your supply chain? I mean, if your business stops when the container ship doesn't arrive or the cost spikes, etc. So again, how can you de-risk your supply chain? Suppose there aren't the options aren't wonderful. How can you diversify sources? How can you build buffer inventory and so on? But that's not a problem. How can you de-risk your supply chain? I know that's one of the biggest concerns among a lot of small businesses around the world, where, exactly what are the tariffs? What are the implications? Shipping costs. And this can change quite suddenly. Can you capture local value others are leaving behind? Import substitution need not just be government policy. It could be businesses looking for opportunity. Is it, here in Antigua, places people are very concerned about these visa and travel requirements. Are people going to be at home more? Are they going to be doing more things across the region? And how can you take advantage as a local business across some of the ideas? That's something that I'm putting out there. And I guess you guys probably are closer to that. I guess a big thing in theoretical circles, collaborate to compete. Collaboration is the new competition. Certainly in the university sphere, I've never seen this level of collaboration. Joint degrees, moving faculty, and so on. So again, as we deal with a new environment, how can you collaborate? Purchasing cooperatives, shared services, joint marketing, skill sharing, recurring referral networks. How can you identify as three businesses you could collaborate with in a way to give you some scale and flexibility? And it's sort of a survival checklist. Cash position, top 10 expenses, three costs to cut, overdue receivables, mapping your supplier countries, one backup supplier. When you Google your business name, what comes up? Are you out there? And again, we can sort of move to a monthly, quarterly checklist as a survival checklist in this rapidly changing and volatile. But it's volatile. It might not change that much, we hope, but the potential is there. In terms of what SMEs should be demanding from government, the SBA, other support. In these environments, trade intelligence is important, having up-to-date data and clarity on things as they emerge. Again, that cooperation, how can you have group purchasing power? How can regional trade be simplified? Many of these are familiar. How can the digital infrastructure be upgraded and more accessible? Skills pipelines and so on. Again, just to organize, advocate, and so on. I think sometimes a lot of things are in your mindset, a required mindset shift for a more volatile environment, less escape windows. Business as usual, moving to constant adaptation. Wait and see. Instead of preparing for scenarios, compete alone, collaborate to win. Local only, start thinking regional and digital, minimize costs, moving to sort of maximizing your resilience. And in a sense, in a mindset shift, the businesses that thrive will be those that adapted before they actually had to, which is why I think the mindset shift is important. So what I want to conclude by saying the world appears to be changing. Your business can change with it or be changed by it. And I suggest the choice and the action is yours. And I advise you to start this week. Thank you very much.
All right, start this week. Thank you very much, Professor. Let me remind the audience to please place your comments, your questions in the chat. For the next few moments, we'll engage Dr. Robinson on your queries. Again, let me share as well that the session is recorded and we will have this posted on our YouTube channel and our website in the SBA TV section. So you can go back and you can watch this at your leisure and pleasure. And I'm sure that many of you took note of that checklist that the professor recommended and you want to take a copy of it. So, the slides will be there too. The presentation will be there that you can take a look at that. Professor, I took copious notes. Each time you share these presentations, I will admit, you challenge me, somewhat because of the research, the diagnosis. You made the point that our development model post the Cold War hasn't really worked for us, and we're seeing that now with all of the geopolitical issues. We're really seeing that. And I guess that's in some other forum, you may be called upon to advise leaders across the region. Well, if that development model didn't work, what really ought to be the new model for the future? That, in my view, Professor, needs some further distillation. What does that new model look like? Because for years, when you've done the analysis, you've shown that the model of the past did not work. I say to folks on the call, take note of that. But relative to the small business sector, cash is the oxygen of the firm. We must de-risk our supply chains, capture local value, collaborate in order to compete. These are key takeaways that I'm hoping that our firms are listening to and will adapt and adopt for their businesses. The survivor checklist, as I mentioned before, again, another tool that we can include and add to our arsenal. Yes. So at this time, colleagues, let's turn to the chat uh, section and hear your thoughts, your questions, and so on. Dawn, as usual, Dawn, Happy New Year to you. Good to see you on the link with us today. Yes, it's been a very, very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. I took note of what the professor identified as high-risk sectors, those with maybe medium risk and then those with low risk. So that, again, is, in my view, an indication to us based on the sectoral groups that we're in, what we need to do relative to building capacity, building resilience, and so on. So Greg is starting us off. Are there specific government policies in Barbados that are currently fueling or constraining economic growth? Your thoughts, Professor?
Okay, so in terms of government policies, so fueling, constraining growth, and what I would argue is not so much about specific policies, it's about really driving things to completion. So there's a very aggressively spoken about supposedly action, digitization driving law. but is it easy to sell digital services globally or
No.
even locally, making digital payments and so on? So, my sort of general view is that this moment, and this, we said necessity is the mother of invention. So all of these, let me give an example. So like I'm here, we have running a campus in Antigua. All of these students who just automatically went off to the US every year. Suddenly, that window is closed for many of them in a meaningful way. And they have had to pivot, which means that we as an organization have also had to pivot because now we're getting demands in different areas than we had before. So I'm not so much focused on particular policies but in the sense that this moment is gonna throw at us some challenges that we did. So it might not be a simple matter that you can run a small business by going online, ordering this stuff on sheet. I mean, so I always joke, my kids, children always want to make sure that they don't do what their parents do. So my kids don't want anything to do with business. But suddenly, when the cost of getting their little dresses on Shein exploded, they suddenly got very interested in global supply chains. When you're confronted with the reality that now running your small business, you just can't rely on ordering the stuff on Amazon, Shein, getting them here at a price that you, how do you then adapt your business to actually continue to survive? And then government policies, even in terms of things like import duties, other processes may very well have to shift as imports are not going to be coming in any at the same level necessarily to give you that revenue. But if your small business sector is able to compete and deliver goods at prices, you might need to revisit that aspect of your policy because we really have uh, we have a business model, a society that is built around the notion that you could sort of bring in and import pretty much what you want and run your business based on that. That is no longer a predictable element at all. So the entire mindset and others may have to shift.
Mhm. But I mean, in light of that, then let's turn to CARICOM because I took note that one of your points was collaborate to compete, and that collaboration, Professor, cannot be just at the domestic level. I mean, you're the
Right.
principal of the Five Islands campus there in Antigua and Barbuda, right? So for small firms, we have to consider that level of collaboration across CARICOM. But we're stuck, Professor, relative to the CSME. I mean, the E at this point doesn't even look as if it's going to materialize, right? And we've not really gotten the single market functioning as we would like. But the CSME, I remember when Arthur, a very strong proponent, a very strong advocate for the CSME as a mechanism primarily for small businesses, to help small firms to be able to expand trade goods and services, move capital, and et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts on the operationalization really of the CSME and in particular getting that single economy going?
Yeah, I mean, as I always say, even though I'm an academic, I like to think of myself as a practical person. So when I look at the OECS has achieved a level of integration that CARICOM cannot even begin to envisage. And it would seem to, and I think, but why has that happened? I think in many ways, because these countries were so small, they felt they had no other choice. They had no other choice. And what I'm suggesting is that because of this global shift, the rest of the region does not have a choice. They are almost, even though they are bigger, they're in the OECS position. So as I said, when I was offered this job here, I went and renewed my citizen passport, which means I don't have to apply for a work permit. I don't have to apply for any CSME skill certificate. I show up at the airport, I show my passport, and I can work.
Mhm. Mhm.
Students sometimes choose to come to Five Islands rather than some of the other traditional campuses that have much bigger reputations. Because if they're from the OECS and they come here, they can get a job while they're studying. They can get a job right after. They don't have to worry about it. It's a single currency. They don't have to open a new bank account.
Mhm.
Whatever account they had in St. Lucia or Grenada, they can come here, use it, use the same debit card. They don't actually have to do anything. In terms of medicines, they do OECS wide procurement. So we have this model, and it seems to me that we can begin to scale this up. It's far from perfect, but the level of integration that occurred because of necessity. But again, what I mean, like in my office here, in the principal's office in Five Islands, there's no Antiguan working in this office.
Mhm.
And that is not abnormal.
Mhm.
You have a
Yeah.
campus principal who for the purposes of this job is not a Bayesian, he's a Vincentian. My assistant is Jamaican, my secretary is Dominican. I have three Dominican secretaries. I mean, I'm actually quite intrigued that Dominica and Antigua are one economy.
Mhm.
Every third person you meet on the street in Antigua is Dominican or even Jamaican. So I think we have a model that we can scale up. And I think it's now become necessary. And in many ways, the migration valve, which is closing, is much more important to Jamaica, Guyana, and Trinidad than they are to Barbados and the OECS. So if I
Mhm.
want the election campaign trail now, I would, and if somebody had asked me to do something in a manifesto, my key policy would be for Barbados to join the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States.
Mhm.
That would be my number one policy initiative.
Mhm. Okay. So your recommendation is just simply to scale. You have the OECS already.
If you have it there, you don't
Matter
need
of
to
fact,
replicate.
it was touted some time ago that Barbados should join the OECS. That idea was
That
touted
there's a
before.
single
Mhm.
telecoms authority that regulates all the telecoms.
Mhm.
There's a single airport type of authority that does all of that regulation. So I think we
Mhm.
have a model we can
Yeah.
follow.
Yeah. Because I'm looking at markets for MSMEs, and that's the issue.
Exactly.
Our market here is clearly too small. We have to expand the base for small firms, and that is what the CSME
I'm seeing,
portended for
I
the
mean,
sector.
I'm seeing so many areas here in Antigua that I think Barbadian businesses would just make a killing. I mean, coming
Mhm.
from the KFL campus, we're just so good at putting on like small things we take for granted. Putting on
Mhm.
an event, that sort of event management. I mean, I'm constantly looking to fly down some of my colleagues from KFL to show them. And we do these things very, very well in Barbados. There are
Mhm.
these tourist attractions here. They have a lot of natural beauty, but
Mhm.
we've honed that expertise in Barbados in a way. And I see so much opportunities. And people don't have to live here to do it.
Yeah, that's right. All right. So maybe opening up another topic in this political season relatively to the political will. So I mean, let's go to the other point here, Professor. Looking at Patricia's comment, not so sure if you're saying it. Do you think we are currently positioned to answer the call now that the U.S. window has closed? That's an interesting point.
No,
What do you say
I think
about
no. The honest answer is no,
mm,
and we have to pivot very, very quickly to meet this potential demand. And so, I mean, and it's just a small things. I mean, it's not even so much in our subject offerings. it's like the levels of service the students are accustomed to. When they send an email to their US university, they get a response within 24 hours. I mean, I get people calling me. I sent an email to somebody a week ago and it wasn't even acknowledged. Registering for courses. People are accustomed to do these things very, very smoothly. You have an issue, your professor is required to meet with you. So it's a whole new service level. I mean, hopefully some of the diaspora people, if they want to engage or to stay here, they can bring those skills into our market. So the answer is no. We have to adjust the product, the course offerings as well. And then putting that service level really needs to adjust. Because I mean, that's the point I was making when I was saying, we've built economies that a lot of people endure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
I have a colleague from Mona who says that in the Caribbean, you get three types of service. There's the friend service, there's the tourist service, and then there's the rest of them service. And again, we need to pivot very rapidly. And I'm just thinking that the moment calls for us to bring a level of seriousness to what we are doing as countries that I'm not sure. And that's why I say no one is coming to save us. I mean, I don't want to sound like I think the world is going to fall, but I think what has happened demands from us a level of seriousness from top to bottom that I'm not sure I'm actually seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. I agree with you. I'm not saying it. Our leaders are too myopic in my
Yeah,
view, too inward looking and not appreciating the urgency of the moment. And that we need regional solutions, right? The
yeah.
solutions cannot be just domestic. We don't have the market for it. We talk about business, we ain't got the market for it. We need regional solutions. But then when you look at the region, you have countries, pulling in different directions. The same divide and rule, you know.
And see, to me, this is
Yeah.
to me, this is like when something happened to you and you go to the doctor. This is not a flu. You don't have the flu. That you just go and take the medication and you can be all right after. This is like you're now diabetic. You have to manage this for the rest of your life differently. And I'm not
Mhm.
sure I'm seeing that shift.
Yeah. All right, Don is making another interesting point here about being able to monetize the social media content and the like. We've had a challenge with that for a while. I think it's what only Jamaica. I was reading some report that showed only Jamaica really was able to sell using the Google platform, Spotify, and so on. But several of the others, you still have that geo blocking that exists in several of the other
So,
territories. So
I mean, so solving payment, that is clearly a matter of political will. And as I tried to say in the presentation, we've built economies that serve the elites.
elites.
So they are clearly powerful players, particularly in the financial services sector, that benefit and make a lot of money from the existing arrangement. And there hasn't really been any particular will to unblock that. But in this environment, do you have a choice? How do you provide a decent living for a number of people? I mean, so when we talk about the cost of living, I mean, part of the big problem is, which I think even for the government is struggling in the sense that where are the new or where are the high paying jobs? So, I mean, I engage people. Okay, so, guys said to me, oh, we just announced a big hotel project, the government doing. Why isn't the public excited? But Barbadians, people don't need to be trained. People kind of know their reality.
Mhm.
Most of those jobs are like 1,200 US a month job. That's a job in Barbados. If you're taking home $2,000 a month from a job in Barbados, it's a struggle.
Hmm.
So people are not excited about it. Okay, they might go and do it, etc. But some people might make a choice, for that kind of money. If I have to find somebody to take care of my child or look after my mother, is it really worth it? I have to dress to go to work. So finding these new avenues are quite critical, and these are really not, for the most part, technical problems. These are political will problems because the status quo serves powerful elites that are able to exercise that influence, which is why it's important for organizations, the public, to really agitate because that change isn't going to come without
Hmm.
that agitation.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Take that point. Very good point. You said economies that people endure. I took note of that. We've built economies that people endure. The masses are not really benefiting. You're right. The structure is been designed to just benefit the elite, and just a small percentage of the population is
Of course,
benefiting,
of course,
gaining wealth.
when I make that comment now, people often remind me, but Justin, you are now part of that elite. I'm like, I laugh.
But at the same, we gotta keep advocating your research. I remember some time ago in the session where you put up some graphs there that showed the anemic growth, if we can call it that, of our
Yeah.
economies over the last, 20 odd years or so, a little over 2 decades, that indicated back then that we weren't growing in any sustainable way, and we needed to shift the development model. That hasn't happened. And so what we're seeing now is, with all the pressures from the external situations, those geopolitical issues, that still, the conversation, in my view, has not erupted enough at the national level that says, look, the development model has to change because the masses are being left out. And when that happens, you get the elite, yes, they're benefiting. But when the masses continue in this way, if you're not careful, you're heading for major
Yeah,
social
no, and
disruptions in your
in a
country.
way, it's probably not surprising that Jamaica is the only country that has unblocked that digital area, because I spend a lot of time in Jamaica because that's where our headquarters are, and you have to report there. If they don't unblock things, that society would fall apart. They have 2 million plus people that you have to find avenues for, and as that migration valve closes, I think Jamaica has to reimagine itself. If you see an embassy line in Jamaica, you would understand. If you come up Hope Road on a morning, the
Mhm.
embassy line in Jamaica is just unimaginable. That escape valve is huge. And we're talking about brain drain from the Caribbean. A lot of it is Jamaica, Guyana, Trinidad,
Trinidad,
and
yes.
they have
Mhm.
to, yeah, they have to reimagine how they do business as societies.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Professor, time is up. I know that you have another engagement. We can continue chatting, for the rest of the day, because this topic is such an important, critical one, as we look really to the future. Let me remind my audience that we've recorded the session. We'll make this available to you in a day or two on our various platforms. You can check in, members. You're going to get an email with the link that you can go and watch the YouTube video at your leisure and pleasure. And also the slides will be there. I'm encouraging you to jot down the survival checklist that was proposed by Professor Robinson, and also, take note of the sectors that he's, projected could very well be high risk, medium risk, low risk, and begin to use that information in your planning for the rest of this year. We're going to place a link now in the chat, and ask you, please click on this link. Give us 5 minutes of your time and complete this feedback tool for us, so that we at least can plan a lot better as we go forward. Professor, your closing thoughts, closing comments before we wrap up completely. There's a question there from Sandra. I'm not so sure if you're able to answer that in your closing comments. We would appreciate that. Does the development model still really exist? Prior governments created 20 years, development strategies, and so on. But, we seem not to be focused on long-term planning at this time. So give us your final
Yeah,
comments,
okay.
Professor.
Yeah, thanks for that. And again, thanks for the opportunity to engage. And I think my message is hopefully simpler that I'm of the view that what we are facing now is is not a rupture. It's not something that's going to cut and heal. It's a fundamentally changed world, which means that we're going to deal with greater volatility and uncertainty with our external arrangements. The migration gap seems to be going to be much reduced, which means that as a Caribbean societies, we have to build greater self-reliance, providing greater opportunities at home. And that necessitates a different economic model, a different way of doing business. It's not a simple matter that you can migrate if things don't work out, or you have a business built on sourcing materials, accessing from abroad. We need a complete rethink of what we do, and it's an urgent problem that we have to address from early. In many ways, and linked sort of the question, following IMF and others, what a lot of government policy and planning has been around is providing macro fiscal stability. And I think in some ways that's where a lot of the disconnect between the governments and the policy makers and the public. And I think the reality is that macro fiscal stability is necessary, but far from sufficient. So, for example, I think the current administration has done an amazing job in moving Barbados from macro fiscal instability to macro fiscal stability. I think they've done an amazing job and deserve credit for that. But in a way, that's just a foundation. What hasn't come is, well, where do we go from here? How do we actually create high paying jobs? How do we, the quality of life? And I think that is where a lot of the disconnect is going. And I think we have to shift that mindset within our businesses, starting from where we are, and really do what we can within our own organizations at that micro level, and really lobby and put pressure on the authorities above, because the status quo always works for certain elites. And they're not going to give it up just like that because it's the right thing to do. It
Mhm.
will only come from pressure. Thank you.
From Professor. Yeah. Thank you very much. Professor, as you began the presentation today, you said, no one is coming to save us. I think that's a good way to end. No one is coming to save us. We obviously have to save ourselves. Um, Colleagues, we've been listening to Professor Justin Robinson. He's the principal of the Five Islands campus of the University of the West Indies, located there in Antigua and Barbuda. And he shared, lots of information I believe that we can really meditate upon as we seek to chart a path for our businesses in the ensuing months and years. Again, I remind you that the session has been recorded and it's going to be made available on our various platforms in another day or two. So you can go on and you can watch and you hopefully take down that checklist. I want you to really record that survival checklist and try to apply some of these tools to your firms. This has been our webinar for the month of January. Members of the association, please listen out for our upcoming networking session in the month of February. As we look to the Valentine's season, we have a special business affair event coming up, and we're going to share that information with you very soon. It's a networking event for our members as we look to the Valentine's season. So listen out for that. I've been your moderator today, and it's been a pleasure as usual. Please stay tuned to the upcoming events for the remainder of our financial year, which ends this June, as we continue our membership engagement, networking, and building opportunities for all. Again, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you on the next occasion. God bless you all. Bye-bye for now. Have a good day, everyone. Thanks, Professor.